Welcome to my expat stories. Fraser went to the Philippines for a fresh start and found something worth keeping. A woman called Rowena, a life-taking shape, a version of himself he could respect. Then his mates flew in from Glasgow for a stag do. 4 days. Angeles City. And on one particular night, in one particular bar, something happened that Fraser hadn't planned and couldn't unfeel. If you've ever had a single moment rewrite everything you thought you knew about yourself, subscribe now, because Fraser's about to tell you what that actually costs. Here's Fraser. My name's Fraser. 41. Glasgow. Parkhead, if that means anything to you. Which it will if you know Glasgow and won't if you don't. Electrician by trade. Worked the rigs for 6 years before my knees said enough, came out with savings and no particular plan, and a mate who said the Philippines, Fraser, seriously, just go. So, I went. That was 3 years before any of this. I'm not going to dress that up. I went because I was 40 years old and single, and bored in a specific way that only men who've spent years on offshore platforms understand, where the boredom is structural, built into the rotation, and you need somewhere new to put yourself when the rotation stops. I found Dumaguete first. Quiet city, university town. Sat on the boulevard for a week and felt my shoulders drop for the first time in years. Then I found work. Electrical contracting, expat construction projects, enough to live well and save a bit. Then I found Rowena. She was working at the admin office of the company I contracted through. Small room, 2 desks. She handled the paperwork side of things. Contracts, permits, the bureaucratic machinery of getting construction done in a city that had its own pace and its own way of doing things. She was efficient and unhurried simultaneously, which sounds contradictory and isn't. She got things done without any of the performance of getting things done. I asked her to dinner after 3 weeks of finding reasons to go to the admin office. She said yes without making a thing of it, which I appreciated. We ate at a place on the boulevard, the sea breeze coming off the water, the sound of the city settling into its evening rhythm. And she talked about her family in Negros and I talked about Parkhead. And at some point I thought, I'd like to keep doing this. This specific thing. Talking to this specific person. I'm not a man who says that kind of thing out loud, but I knew it. Rowena was 34, from a town outside Bacolod. Came to Dumaguete for the job, sent money home monthly, shared a flat with a cousin. She was faithful in a way that had nothing to do with performance. Faithful to her family, to her word, to whatever she said she was going to do. I watched her across 8 months of evenings and Sundays before anything was settled between us. And in all of that watching, I never saw her be one thing in public and another in private. She was the same person in every room. I hadn't been with someone like that before. Not because I'd been with bad people, just because I'd never been with someone so consistently, quietly, themselves. We got engaged on a Sunday morning on the boulevard, the water flat and silver in the early light, the city not yet awake. I didn't do a speech, just asked. She said yes and looked at me in a way I'd like to be able to describe accurately, and can't. We had coffee afterwards at the place we always went and talked about the house. We'd been planning a house on a plot of land her family had outside Bacolod. Modest, solid, somewhere to bring children eventually. We talked about the layout, the kitchen, the garden she wanted for vegetables, and the covered terrace I wanted for the evenings. It was the most ordinary conversation I'd ever had, and the most important one. That was the life. That was what I had. Then Craig rang from Glasgow and said he was getting married, and he wanted a stag do in the Philippines, and was Fraser in. Craig was the mate who told me to come out here in the first place. 6 of them flew in. Craig, his brother, 3 lads I'd known since school, and one I'd never met who was Craig's future brother-in-law, and who spent the whole trip slightly overwhelmed by everything. They landed at Clark Airport, and I met them and drove them to Angeles City, which is where the stag night was going, because that's where stag nights go in the Philippines, which they knew, and we didn't need to say. I want to be clear about my state of mind going in. I was an engaged man. I was building a house. I had something worth having, and I knew I had it. I went to Angeles City as the responsible one, the local, the one who knew how things worked, the one who would make sure nobody got themselves into serious trouble. That was my role. I was comfortable with my role. Fields Avenue on a Friday night is a thing unto itself. The strip lit up, bar after bar, the music layered from every doorway, competing and combining into something that was less music and more atmosphere. A physical thing, the base of it in your chest, the smell of grilled meat from the street carts and cigarette smoke and perfume, and the warm night air over all of it. Women calling from every entrance. The whole street a kind of organised chaos that had been running the same way for decades and knew exactly what it was doing. We hit 4 bars in 3 hours. The lads were loud and happy in the way that a group of men away from their normal lives gets loud and happy. Craig was wearing a sash and a cheap crown and grinning the grin of a man whose mates have flown across the world for him. I drank more than I'd intended, not because anyone pressured me, just because the night had its own momentum, and I went with it further than I'd planned. The 5th bar was smaller, further down the strip. Someone in the group had been pointed towards it. We went in, sat down. The lighting was different in there. Lower, warmer, amber rather than neon white. The music was slower, and the women working the bar were different. In a way, it took me a moment to process, standing there with a drink in my hand, and the bass from the street still in my chest and the whiskey doing what whiskey does. The lads clocked it before I said anything. Craig's brother said something I won't repeat, and everyone laughed and someone ordered another round, and the night continued. I sat down, and a woman called Natasha sat down next to me. She was 26, tall, with a quality of stillness that was different from the busy energy of the strip outside. She had good English and a specific kind of confidence. Not the performance confidence of someone working a room, something quieter than that. She asked my name. I told her. She asked where I was from. She said she'd never met anyone from Glasgow. I said most people hadn't. She laughed. Not a work laugh. A real one. I knew what Natasha was. I wasn't confused about that. I was 41 years old. I'd spent 6 years on offshore platforms with men from every background and every persuasion. I wasn't naive about the world or the people in it. I knew, and I stayed sitting down anyway, while the lads moved around the bar and Craig got louder and the night got later, and the whiskey kept arriving. I stayed where I was and talked to Natasha. At some point, the talking stopped being just talking. I'm not going to detail what happened. I'm going to tell you it happened, and that I was not so drunk I didn't know what I was doing, and that somewhere in the middle of it something shifted in me that I felt as clearly as you feel a door opening in a room where you didn't know there was a door. I walked back to the hotel at 3 a.m. The strip was still going, the music still bleeding from every doorway, somebody's laughter rising above it, a moped accelerating through the heat. The air smelled of the night and the food carts, and the city doing what it always did, completely indifferent to what had just happened to me. I stood in the hotel shower for a long time, not because of guilt. That's what I need you to understand. And it's the part that frightened me more than anything else. Not guilt, something else entirely. Something that felt in the steam and the water, and the 4 a.m. silence, uncomfortably close to clarity. The week after the stag do I was quieter than usual, and Rowena noticed. She didn't say anything directly. That wasn't her way. She just watched me with a quality of attention that was careful rather than worried. The attention of someone who sees a change in the weather and waits to understand it, rather than reacting immediately. She made dinner. She asked about the contracting job. She sat beside me on the terrace in the evenings, with her feet tucked up and her phone in her hand, and the sound of the neighbourhood settling into night around us. And she was simply there, which was what she always was, which was the thing I'd valued most about her, and which now had a quality to it I couldn't name. I told myself it would pass, that it was the shock of newness and the whiskey, and the specific altered state of a stag night, and that it would settle back into the shape of my life the way these things settle. I told myself that with complete conviction for about 10 days. Then I drove back to Angeles City. I told Rowena it was a job, an expat project in Pampanga that needed an electrician with my specific certifications. I said it might be 2 days, maybe 3. She said, okay, travel safe, text when you arrive. She handed me a container of food she'd made that morning. Rice and something slow cooked that filled the car with the smell of it for the first hour of the drive, warm and familiar and hers. I put it on the passenger seat and drove north, and the smell of it sat beside me the whole way. I need you to understand the state I was in. Not reckless, not drunk, not caught up in some wild version of myself I didn't recognise. I was completely sober and completely clear-headed, and I drove to Angeles City with full knowledge of what I was doing. That's the part I've had to sit with. There was no version of that drive where I could claim I didn't know. I knew. I went anyway. Fields Avenue in the afternoon is a different place from Fields Avenue at midnight. Less charged. The bars mostly quiet. The strip blinking into its daytime version of itself. A few men sitting at open-fronted bars with afternoon beers and nowhere to be. The whole place had a slightly deflated quality in the daylight, like a stage set before the performance. I walked it slowly, found the bar, smaller than I remembered, the amber lighting switched off, the afternoon sun doing nothing flattering to the interior. I asked for Natasha. The woman behind the bar looked at me without particular surprise. She'd seen men like me before, returning men with a specific purpose, and said Natasha hadn't been in for 2 weeks. She didn't know if she was coming back. Some of the girls moved around. Cebu sometimes. Manila. She shrugged. That was how it was. I stood on the pavement outside the bar in the Angeles afternoon sun and felt something I can only describe as the floor dropping slightly. Not devastation. I want to be precise about this. Not the grief of losing a person you love. Something different. The specific frustration of a door that had opened and then closed, and that you couldn't find again. The wanting without the object of the wanting, which is, I've since understood, one of the more uncomfortable places a person can be put. I drove back to Dumaguete. Rowena was at the kitchen table when I got back, a day earlier than expected, marking something in a notebook. She looked up and said, "You're back. How did it go?" I said, "Fine." She said, "You look tired." I said, "Long drive." She got up and put the kettle on, and I sat at the table and looked at the notebook she'd been writing in. House stuff. A list of materials, measurements, the name of a builder her cousin had recommended. She'd been working on the house while I was gone, planning the future we'd agreed on. The kettle boiled. She made tea, set the cup in front of me, sat back down with her notebook. I looked at her across the kitchen table, the evening light coming through the window behind her, the sound of the neighbour's television through the wall, the smell of the slow-cooked food still faintly in the air from that morning. Rowena with her notebook and her builder's name, and her total, unsuspecting faith in the man sitting across from her. I drank the tea, said nothing. The months that followed had a texture I find difficult to describe accurately. On the surface, everything continued. The contracting work, the house taking shape in Bacolod. I drove down with Rowena every few weeks to check the progress, stood on the plot with the builder, and talked about foundations and wiring and the covered terrace, and watched the walls go up and tried to feel what I should have felt, which was pride and anticipation and the satisfaction of a concrete future taking physical form. I felt some of that. The feelings were real. They existed alongside the other thing, and neither cancelled the other out. And living with both simultaneously was the most exhausting thing I've ever done. The other thing. I need to talk about it plainly. I went back to Angeles City twice more, not to find Natasha. I'd accepted she was gone, and the acceptance had its own particular weight to it. I went because the wanting that had been switched on needed somewhere to go, and Angeles City was where it had learned to go. Different bars, different nights. The amber lighting and the bass from the strip outside, and women who were not what they appeared to be at first glance, and who I was not confused about, and who I sought out specifically for that reason. I'm not going to dress any of that up. I did it. I knew what I was doing each time, and each time I drove back to Dumaguete, with the knowing sitting in the passenger seat beside me the whole way, and each time Rowena was exactly who she always was. Warm, faithful, planning the future, making tea, marking things in the notebook, and each time I sat across from her and said nothing. I was not a man who had been confused about himself before this. That's the thing I keep returning to. 41 years. Glasgow. Offshore platforms. A life lived in male company where certain things were clear and certain things were not discussed, and the not discussing them made them feel clear even when they weren't. I had never had reason to examine this specific part of myself because it had never presented itself as something requiring examination. I thought I knew who I was. That knowing felt like solid ground. And then one night in a bar in Angeles City, the ground shifted, and I discovered it hadn't been solid at all. It had just been untested. Rowena asked me once during those months if I was all right. We were at the building site, the walls up, the roof frame going on, standing in what would be the kitchen looking out at what would be the garden. She asked it quietly, sideways, not pressing. She said, "You seem far away sometimes. Is everything okay?" I said everything was fine. I was just thinking about the wiring. She looked at me for a moment, then nodded, then went back to looking at the garden. She knew something was wrong. I believed that. Rowena was not a woman who missed things. She was just a woman who trusted me enough to believe I'd tell her when I was ready, which was a trust I was not honouring. and which felt, in the evening light on that building site, like the worst thing I'd ever done. Worse than the bars. Worse than the driving. Worse than the wanting. The trust she was extending, and the use I was making of it. I looked at the garden, thought about the vegetables she was going to grow there, the terrace, the evenings we'd planned, a life I had chosen and still wanted, and could not make whole because something inside it was missing. Now that hadn't been missing before, and I didn't know what to do with the missing. The house kept going up. I kept going back to Angeles City. Rowena kept planning. And one evening she sat across from me at the kitchen table and said, "Fraser, I need to tell you something." And she said it with such specific seriousness, such deliberate calm, that something in me went cold before she'd finished the sentence. She said, "I think I'm pregnant." She said it and looked at me and waited. And I sat there with the full weight of every drive north and every amber-lit bar and every return journey with the knowing in the passenger seat. And I looked at the woman who was carrying our child. And I understood, clearly and finally, that I'd run out of time. I said, "That's wonderful." I said it and I meant it, and it was true. And it was also the moment I understood that true can be insufficient, that you can mean something completely, and it still doesn't cover the full distance of what's required. Rowena's face when I said it, the relief in it. She'd been holding that news carefully. I could see that now. The specific carefulness of a woman who has something important to tell, and doesn't know how it will land. The relief when it landed well was the thing I'll carry longest from that evening. She reached across the table and put her hand over mine, and I turned my hand over and held hers, and we sat like that in the kitchen, with the neighbour's television through the wall, and the evening outside and the notebook with the builder's name in it on the table between us. I looked at our hands. I made a decision in that kitchen that I haven't spoken about to anyone until now. I decided to choose, not to drift, not to let the situation make the decision by accumulating until something broke, to actually choose, with full awareness of what I was choosing and what I was choosing not to be. I chose Rowena. I chose the house and the garden and the child coming. I chose the life I'd built and the man I'd been before Angeles City. What I couldn't choose was to unknow what I knew. That part wasn't available. The door that had opened in that bar doesn't close because you decide you'd like it closed. It just stays open permanently, at the edge of your peripheral vision, and you learn to keep your eyes forward, and you get better at it over time, but you never stop knowing the door is there. I didn't tell Rowena. I want to be plain about that. I considered it, sat with the consideration for a long time. Not the specific events, not the bars, but the thing underneath the events, the thing that got switched on. I considered whether she deserved to know who she was building a life with. I considered it seriously and honestly, and I concluded that telling her would be for me, not for her. Would be me transferring the weight rather than carrying it. She was pregnant. She was planning a garden. She trusted me the way she trusted everything, completely without performance, as a basic operating condition of how she moved through the world. Telling her would have taken that from her and given her something in its place that she hadn't asked for and couldn't use. Maybe that reasoning is self-serving. Probably it is. I'm not asking you to approve of it. I'm telling you it's what I decided and why. I stopped going to Angeles City. That was the other part of the decision. And this one was not complicated. The wanting didn't stop. I want to be honest, it didn't stop, and I don't know when or whether it will. But I had a child coming, and a woman who deserved better than the passenger seat version of me that drove north with her cooking beside me. And I made the choice to stop, and I've kept it. The house was finished 4 months later. We drove down to Bacolod on a Saturday morning and walked through the rooms for the first time with the builder. The kitchen with the window that looked onto the garden, the covered terrace. The bedroom we'd argued gently about the colour of, and settled on something between what she wanted and what I'd wanted, which is how you settle things when both people are reasonable, would be the babies. I felt something that would be the babies. I felt something that I can only describe as grief for the simplicity of the man who'd planned these rooms, the man who'd sat on the boulevard and asked her to marry him, the man for whom this house was uncomplicated. That man was still here, he just had company now. Our son was born 7 weeks after we moved in. I was there. I held him in the delivery room, and he was so small and so completely himself. And I stood there holding him and thought about the terrace and the evening we'd planned to sit on it and watch him learn to walk in the garden. And I felt the full weight of everything I was going to do to protect that image, everything I was going to carry, so that image stayed possible. He's 8 months old now. We call him Liam. Her choice, she liked the sound of it. And I liked that she liked it, so Liam it was. He started pulling himself up on the furniture and falling down and pulling himself up again, with a determination that I find unexpectedly moving. Rowena is a mother, the way she's everything else. Completely, without performance, her whole self in it. I watch her sometimes in the evenings on the terrace. Liam in her arms, the garden behind her. She'll be talking to him in a mixture of English and Cebuano, her voice low and easy, and she won't know I'm watching. And I'll stand in the doorway of the house we built and look at the thing I chose, and I'll feel the choosing in both directions simultaneously. What I have, what I am. I don't know what Fraser I am now, the one who chose the terrace and Liam and the evening light. He's real, the one standing in the amber light of a bar in Angeles City, understanding something about himself he hadn't known before. He's real too. I can't make one of them go away by concentrating on the other. I've tried. They both stay. What I know is this. Rowena is faithful and warm and completely herself in every room, and she deserves someone who can give her all of himself back. I give her most of myself. Most is what I have to give now. I give it completely and without reservation, and I will keep giving it. And Liam will grow up in that garden and learn to walk on that terrace, and the life we planned will happen. And somewhere inside the man watching it happen, there's a door that stays open. I don't know what to do about the door. I don't know if there's anything to do. This is my expat stories. And sometimes the thing that changes you forever isn't something done to you. It's something you discover about yourself in a single night. And the life you go back to is the same life and a different one simultaneously. And you learn to live in both at once because there is no other option.